Hello, my friends. We are here for a special edition of iLogic Media presents a conversation on eSports. I'm your friend Johnny Danger. With me is, as you usually see me with, Mr. Christopher Emmerich. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing good. It's been a week or so since I've had a Shark Cove episode, so it's good to be back in front of the camera and talking some esports.
I like it. And you brought a friend with you, John. Would you introduce him?
Yeah, this is John, also known on Twitter as the eSports Plug. Used to be able to find him in the eSports department Discord quite a bit, and now he's spending most of his time in New Venice. But I think a lot of conversation that he's going to have, or we're going to have, he's going to be able to add a lot to it.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate you.
I like it. And then the last corner over there is Tony Fedwa. He is the director of esports and marketing for the Blockhouse in Alma, Michigan. Tell us a little bit about that, Tony.
Yeah, I'd love to. Blockhouse is, for lack of a better word, an esports bar in Alma, Michigan. Odd location for such a, I would call it an upscale place, but essentially what we try to do is be a gathering place for a community centered around gaming. So whether you want to come in and you are a high schooler and you don't really have a gaming rig at home, we've got a rig for you here, like full 1060 Ti's or 1080 Ti's, I think. Like really good gaming rigs. If you are on a date night and you want to just go out and have a nice meal, we've got that for you. You want to have a party, we can do that. You reserve the whole building. It's a really cool space. But I think the coolest part and what's going to be relevant to us is that we do a lot of organized esports leagues, particularly in the amateur scene. So local high schools will come and we'll have on-site LANs every week for Rocket League is what we did recently. We're partnered with the local college and we are kind of their home base for esports. So all of their practices, all of their matches are here. We produce their live streams, stuff like that. So we're kind of like the local home for esports in mid-Michigan, and we're looking to expand and kind of grow our brand a little bit, and then also kind of try to grow high school esports, because that's, I think, an area where there's a lot of potential.
I like it. And I hear you just got some like huge, like immersive rig.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with iRacing, but it's like the premier immersion racing game. So we got some really high-end rigs where you sit down almost like an old arcade machine, but instead of just like the old plastic steering wheels and stuff like that, it's really high-end wheels like you would see in an actual F1 car or a NASCAR vehicle. Actual like like tactile pedals that respond to your feet and respond to like the friction of the road, theoretically. Nice wide screens, and I think we have two of them. One of them is going to have an ultra wide screen that most people would be used to. I think the other, we're going to hook up our VR headset to, our Vive Pro, and we're going to have it be like fully immersive. So you're in the seat with the wheel pedals, shifters, and you're inside a VR headset. It's going to be super cool.
Oh, that's amazing. So I met Tony randomly. I was working for Old Nation selling beer and just kind of walked into a bar and was like, what the heck is going on the other side of this bar? And I saw some food there. It wasn't open. They were just like trying out a few dishes. It looked really good. So I'm going to have to go up there a little later next time and get some food. But, you know, if you're there during lunch, you can always go across the street to Pizza Sam's.
So actually, I can't even let you promote Pizza Sam's because we are opening for lunch soon. So you don't have to come later. You can actually come eat at Blockhouse whenever you want.
All right, fair.
That sponsorship aside, I actually, even if I didn't work at Blockhouse, I do think if I grew up in the Alma area, I would probably spend upwards of 8 hours a day there. Yeah,
I remember going there in the late 80s, and I don't think it's changed a bit.
Yeah, so it's something.
Not at all. All right. Well, the point was we were going to kind of get together and talk to Tony. Tony really is exclusively on the esports side and teaching people about it and being involved in it, and really excited to, you know, maybe someday before he retires, see the U.S. compete in the worldwide level in esports. Maybe it'll happen. I don't know. It could happen. I don't really know why. So who wants to talk a little bit about esports in North America and, you know, how it compares to Southeast Asia and, you know, the other parts of the world that dominate, frankly?
Well, I think that, I mean, when you say that, when, you know, and we're not exclusively talking League of Legends here. We're talking about a lot of different esports. And when you talk about a lot of different esports, there are ones that right now North America competes at. What's strange is oftentimes North America, when a game comes out, is very good at it, but they very quickly become outscaled, whether by Europe or Asia, depending on the type of game, to a point where some of the games just that are played quite a bit in Europe, let's say like CSGO still professionally, but the North American scene is very dried up. League of Legends is just not something that NA is competitive at, and they probably won't ever in comparison to China or Korea. It's player based, it's culture, it's a lot of different things. But I think if there is a spot where they're going to be a force, right now it's going to be Valorant and games similar to that, shooting games. I think that just fits a little bit better with what people
America like. And games with guns. Gotcha.
Yeah.
There's no connection, no correlation at all.
Where I was going with it. So
yeah, it's kind of an interesting subject. There's a couple reasons why I think like North America has not been as competitive traditionally in most games versus a lot of these other places. I mean, places like South Korea got a big head start. A lot of people that don't know this, back in the days of like StarCraft 1, South Korea was so good that like when they started doing international qualifiers, it ended up just being that like whoever didn't qualify in South Korea would just travel to other countries and they would just win all the qualifiers. Sometimes the major tournaments would just be like 32 South Korean guys, one representing, the United States, one representing different countries in Europe. So they started like a long time before us, and they also have much better pipelines, I think. The other thing that people always bring up is America's like very much a console nation. We have a lot of like console gaming here, where there's some other countries where PCs are a little bit more, the thing to go to versus consoles. So lots of reasons for it, but hopefully we compete someday.
And Tony, you had brought up in a conversation that I had with you about also internet speed and the vast, difference between East Coast and West Coast, and just trying to get everybody on actually effective servers.
Yeah. So like, that's one of my big problems with esports in America in general. I guess problem isn't the right word, but one of the big issues that we have to tackle is just the sheer size of North America geographically. A place like South Korea, you can have one server and everyone's got less than 20 ping. In America, the League of Legends server, I'll use that as an example because I'm the most familiar, used to be in Chicago, and professional players out on the West Coast would be playing on 60, 70 ping, which is just not conducive to a competitive environment. It's reversed. It used to be West Coast, and they had good ping. We did not out on the East Coast. Now they've moved to Chicago, and now the professional players have been playing on terrible ping. Only very recently did Riot, the developer, even take action to try and give the professional players a competitive environment in which to play. And so that extends to other games as well. It's not just League, but geographically there's got to be something that you can do to help alleviate that issue. And we're finally starting to take steps in the League scene to try and make America more competitive again.
Well, Chris, I feel like you should just call up Elon Musk and just get some dedicated Starlink just for, League of Legends.
Yeah, maybe. But still, the entire size of the country. I mean, even if you go back to, Fortnite as an example, as that was becoming a competitive game when it first launched, you had two separate sides. You had the West Coast, you had the East Coast, and these people weren't going to play against each other unless they had some type of competition that they went to. And then there were situations where if you were playing, and you had somebody on the West Coast, you had to play one game on a West Coast server, one game on an East Coast server, and that just throws out the entire competitive balance of the game and makes it less enjoyable to watch because one team has a distinct advantage over the other. And your point about Korea, I mean, those guys in Korea can play with the guys in China, and somehow that connection is better than the East Coast versus the West Coast. I don't actually know the difference in sizes, but they have a huge advantage with that, and the infrastructure is much better.
And the other piece of that too is like the obvious solution is just make another server. Like in Fortnite, you have East and West for League. Just make another server, have one be out West for the pros and have one be out East for all of the casuals. But for a game like League, you don't really have the player base in America, kind of what we were talking about earlier. The player base just isn't there. It's not sizable enough to sustain multiple servers. For a game like Fortnite, it is. For Rocket League, it is somehow. But so like if you don't have that population, the answer is not that simple.
Fair enough. So I have an 8-year-old really getting into Fortnite. Should I push him towards something else so he can afford to buy me a Jeep for his 16th birthday?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%.
What game is that?
Honestly, it's probably League. It's either League or Valorant, probably. I kind of think Valorant is probably on its way to trying to supplant CS:GO. So I would go one of those two ways.
All right, yeah, I think he likes the shooter, so I'll get him some Valorant. We'll get that going. So, John, you have some experience with that. You have a son that plays competitively in high school. If I am pushing him that route, I mean, how many hours do I have to ignore that he's in front of a screen on a daily basis?
We sometimes forget we have a son.
Right?
I mean, yeah, I don't know if you have to push him, but as soon as my son got a computer in his room, it was kind of game over, which is kind of how I was when I was his age. So I don't blame him at all.
Yeah, I have a 17-year-old that I bought a gaming computer for last year, and I haven't seen him since. So.
Yeah, I mean, he started playing when he was.
But it's too late for the 17-year-old. Chris told me he's a lost hope. It's like he's already too old. He's aged out. It's over.
You're done.
Yeah.
My son started when he was somewhere around 7 was when he first started playing, and then he's been grinding for the last coming up on 10 years at this point. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that raises an interesting point of like how many hours should I expect my son to just be sitting in front of a computer? And obviously that's going to vary person to person depending on individual skill. But then there's also the issue of if you were in high school and you were on a football team, it's not how many hours am I on a football field, it's how many hours am I at football practice, right? How many hours am I spending training in a locker room with my team? You don't really get that in esports. There's no organized practices. You're not really on a team unless you happen to have a high school team near you, which isn't super common. There's no real organization at that level. It's more just you finding things that happen to exist in your area. Outside of that, you're kind of on your own. You're kind of just playing the solo queue game, trying to get recognized. At least that's how it's been for a long time.
Sure. So I really found out about League of Legends and mostly professional esports during the first COVID shutdown when all 4 major sports shut down, just over 2 years ago. Chris and I do a little work for a fantasy site and had been doing podcasts for a few years for fantasy football mostly. And we kind of sat there and looked at each other and said, now what are we going to do? And I don't know if Chris was already playing the League of Legends on DraftKings or not, or if it was just kind of like what else is going on and you just kind of search the page. How did we end up on that, Chris?
Well, like a lot of people, like my job was not shut down, but it was severely limited because at the time I was selling home remodels and not a lot of people were having people over. We weren't getting a lot of leads. The business was still up and running because of the backlog, but I basically had nothing to do. So I, stayed up and I was playing games, drinking whiskey. And then all of a sudden DraftKings started offering all these huge League of Legends contests. And I was like, my background was more in like StarCraft and other games like that, but still familiar enough with the scene that I thought it would be pretty cool. And then, I started winning. I started doing well. I would constantly send you and everybody in our chat, like, I just won this tournament. I just won this tournament. I just won this tournament. And, it became something that was like, at one point, I was almost done with DFS. I was like, man, I looked at my numbers. They're terrible in baseball. They're terrible in football. What am I doing? I'm wasting my money. I'm going to go get healthy. And then the pandemic came and I just started, staying up, watching Asian esports and drinking and betting and doing well at it, though. That was the other thing is, I'm not getting paychecks right now, but I can make, $1,500 in a night, betting this game that I had no idea what was going on from a DFS standpoint. And I think a lot of people were like that. I was one of the people that, stuck with it when regular sports came back because I just looked at my ROI and I was like, man, this is just through the roof in comparison to the other ones. I know John's background's a little bit different than that. You go a little bit back before the COVID boom.
Yeah, I was one of the only people that was playing DFS for League of Legends before COVID. Back then, the biggest tournament we really had was like 50 people, was like the biggest field that you could get. Every night we played, there was usually a tournament that had either 9 or 13 or 11 people in it. That was $100 buy-in. That was the biggest tournament we had for League of Legends. And I played that every day for, I don't know, like a year and a half before COVID. But it was real funny when COVID happened was like, I was pretty unknown. I knew like some of the guys that were pretty well-known DFS guys, but mostly nobody knew who I was. And then all of a sudden when COVID happened, people started DMing me all over the place, like, "Hey, can you come on my show and like explain what League of Legends is to people because we don't have anything else to talk about? Like, please come tell us about it." So I
that
kind of
first
got, like,
week or so, I had to have Chris. I'd be like, I'd pull up the live stream and I'd have him on the chat, and I'd be like, okay, explain what this is, because I don't even know what this game is.
Yeah, I had to go on a bunch of them.
Yeah, and then you had like a 6-hour conversation about the basics of League, and then you had another 12-hour conversation about some of the intricacies of it, and then you had a 3-hour conversation about the steps that the players take to get into game in the first place, and then you fell down the rabbit hole, and now you can't get out. That's how that was my experience.
Yeah, it was a really funny experience. Like, not only having to explain how you play DFS for League of Legends, but having to explain what League of Legends even is, like what the game itself even is, because I was already doing some content, but in my content, it was all about like the specifics, what teams you could expect to get the most kills, et cetera, et cetera. This, I had to go all the way back and be like, this is a video game where, the very basic stuff.
And I mean, quite frankly, plenty of the people that, within the Discord watch it and bet on it from a DFS standpoint still have no idea about the mechanics of the game. And it's conversations we have all the time that, there are players that are good at League of Legends, but not necessarily very good for fantasy. And then they're not necessarily teams that are bad, but maybe they're bad to bet totals on. The two are not mutually exclusive. And you just run into that a lot of times with people getting these biases and not understanding that there are different situations that you need to apply different principles when inside the game betting and those type of things.
So let's push the conversation towards the growth in esports. I obviously did not follow until it became a thing on DraftKings and became a thing over COVID. Have you seen, John and Chris, have you seen an uptick in interest in per users? Is it getting talked about more specifically because it can be found on North American gambling sites?
Yeah, I mean, the explosion during COVID was huge. I mean, we went from tournaments that had 50 people at most to having tournaments that had some nights 10, 20,000 people or whatever were allowed in the $15 during some of the peak COVID times. And now it's calm. The other sports are back, so things calm back down. The fields are usually like between 1,000 and 3,000 now, somewhere in that range. But there's definitely a lot of interest that was not there before, and a lot of people stayed behind, kind of like Emmerich was talking about. We have a mutual friend, Wilson, who was a really well-known high-stakes player in other games and has stuck around as a League fan. He now watches League just as a fan all the time, and he'd never heard of it before COVID. So there's definitely a lot of people that hung around afterwards after getting exposed to it.
So bigger impact, COVID and people getting into it on DraftKings or the TV show on Netflix?
I think, I would say from like the perspective of where I am at, it was obviously COVID. But everybody loves Arcane. Yeah.
For gambling, it was COVID, but overall, it was probably Arcane.
I mean, I have a 17-year-old about to graduate high school, and him and his friends, like, that's all they talked about every time I see them in a room together. They're like, "Oh, did you see the new episode?" Blah blah blah. Like, they were all about it. None of them play the game.
Well, I'll tell you what, if they watch the game, they get to see Jinx quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit this year.
I mean, even just like anecdotally, obviously I didn't play League DFS, so I wasn't exposed to that growth. But even after Arcane out, it's always fun as like a big League fan to see something League related come out, whether it was like that League doc that was on Netflix like 4 years ago or something like that, just about the pro League scene. And then now Arcane. It's really fun to see people who have no idea what League is, or they know what League is and they think they hate it. They see it and they're like, yeah, I got to try League now. And so,
Tony, did you see an uptake in people coming into the bar interested in learning it after Arcane?
After Arcane, like a little bit, that kind of hit right during a time where college students weren't there, if I remember correctly. Sure. But even just like social media, my Twitter feed was only Arcane content for a solid month and a half.
Yeah.
And it was just, I don't know how it happened, but I mean, it's always cool, like I said, to see new people come into a game like that, especially a game that's been out for over a decade at this point. It's cool to see it grow in new ways and be exposed to new audiences, especially, we kind of touched on it earlier, North America isn't exactly good at League of Legends. Part of that problem is that we just don't have the same player base as a country a tenth of our size. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But if we can get stuff like Arcane now that gets people interested, suddenly we have a bigger player base to pick from and more potential professional players.
Honestly, Tony, I think at some point in your bar, you guys should slap one of those Twitch feeds up over the loudspeakers because some of those commentators are highly entertaining. I mean, they're better
Oh,
than Joe
absolutely.
Buck any day of the week.
Yeah.
Or I
So
mean, like at 8:30 on most weekdays, Tuesday through Saturday, you can turn on the Shark Cove, which is just talks about DFS and gambling and all that good stuff for the slate into it.
That's
Hosted by myself.
Chris's show.
Yeah.
I will think about it. I will say we have a lot of impressionable young ones in there. I think the owners might throw a fit. Maybe like some late night talks. If we can schedule like a 10 o'clock showing, we might be able to swing it.
I don't know about the Friday show. The Friday show sometimes gets a little risky. Some people don't wear shirts.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So
So
we put some risky stuff up on the barrel vault, so we'll have to see. We'll have to see.
but one of the other things, and one of the problems that, and I don't know what it's like. I think it's like this everywhere, so I don't think it's exclusive to it. But getting into League and playing as a very intermediate level player or beginning player is one of the most toxic environments that you can be. I just played solo queue for the last 2 days straight. I did nothing. I actually just went outside for the first time like a couple hours ago. Man, like you fall behind and it gets bad. It gets bad. And I'm guilty of it too.
It's really interesting to see people that have not ever experienced that before start to experience it. One of my favorite experiences of the last couple of years was we have a friend who's a kind of like middle-aged stockbroker, and he'd never been a gamer his whole life. And he's like, teach me how to play League. And we started playing League. His first couple of games that he played, like people would just classic League. If you've played it, people, you're 5 minutes in, people are like FF, like this is over. And he'd be like, why is everyone here so? And then you play with him for like a year, and after a year, he's like, oh geez, here we go. It's another feeding. Like you slowly learn like how that mentality builds on people.
Yeah. Well, it's a very hard game to learn. I mean, they really don't help you. They're just like, hey, here's the basic buttons for one character. By the way, there's 40 of them, and we're not going to show you all of them. Good luck.
Yeah, 140 of them.
Yeah, and not only that, but you have to rely on 4 other people. And if 1 or 2 of those people are not playing well, I mean, you blame it. It's like especially at low level, it's like when somebody says something, I'm like, guys, you've had bad games. I can look at your game history right now. But I'll tell you, one of my favorite things was John did a challenge where he played every champion from A to Z in order. And you had to there was an over under on how quickly he could do it. He couldn't advance without a win or something like that. And I bet the under. Or I bet I bet against him, basically.
It was about how many games I could win out of the total of 151 games. How many would I win playing them all in order and ranked?
And I bet against him. And so when I would see him like start to tilt and go on like these 3-game losing streaks and just, oh man, it was very entertaining and it was good because you knew he was probably going to lose another game before he like snapped out of it or decided to turn off the stream for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, like I had an interesting conversation a couple of months ago with a guy who comes in a lot who works at the bookstore down the street. He plays a lot of fighting games, and his take is that fighting games in particular, and then I kind of related it to MOBAs, are really good at making you grow both mentally and emotionally. And what he meant by that is that you basically have to accept that everything around you is happening the way it is. You can't control what your teammates are doing. You can't control what the other team is doing. The only thing that you can control is like what you are doing in that moment. And then it just becomes a game of decisions rapidly over and over and over again. And what is the best thing I could be doing in this moment of time? And I think that's the big leap that a lot of League players and video game players in general have to make is like, at some point after you play long enough, you have to stop blaming everyone else, even if it is objectively their fault that you are in a bad spot. At some point, you just have to accept that things like that happen, and then you have to see what you can do in that time. And then he likes to talk about that leading to like personal growth in real life and things like that. And that's kind of why I like esports. That's why I like competing, even though I don't get the chance much anymore, is because stuff like that is a chance for growth that I think a lot of people who are nerdy and play video games all the time, you don't often get that opportunity, especially if you're just playing solo queue,
Well, and 2 points to that. So, one of the games that we were playing yesterday, like you do have to like learn how to interact with people. And, so I was playing with another person, and he was raging a little bit. He was, to be fair, our team was not doing what they should be doing, and he was forcibly correcting them. But so what I was doing is to make sure that they didn't check out. I was playing the good cop, and I was just complimenting him, like, great engage right there. You're doing fantastic. You really learned, and that it's a skill that you learn from there. But I think the other thing that you learn from it is that, or you have to accept, and from the gambling side of it, is you're not going to win every game. In fact, your win rate's going to be a lot closer to 50%, and that's not going to feel good. But if you're winning 60% of your games, if you're winning 60% of your bets, you're probably doing very well. And it's just tough to get through that other 40% and just understand that that's what life is, and that's just to be expected.
In all skill-based gambling, there's a lot of like very important life lessons you can learn. And I say skill-based gambling because we're talking about DFS or poker or things that are not just the lottery, things where you have an effect on the outcome. And one thing that you learn really fast in betting is that people drastically overestimate how often the thing that's supposed to happen is going to happen. Like whatever the likely outcome is, people drastically overestimate how often those things happen. They think that things that are likely to happen nearly 100% of the time. When in reality, a lot of the time, things that are likely to happen like 63% of the time or something like that. But when they're the most likely outcome, if two basketball teams are playing and one of them is better, people assume the better team is going to win like 93% of the time, like a huge percent. And that's just not how it goes with almost any of this stuff. And League is the same way, is that people think to themselves, if I'm the better laner, I should always win this game. Like that's how they feel in their minds. Like I should just always win because I'm better than this guy or whatever. When really, and especially in a game like this that has a lot of variance, it's like Emmerich said, pretty close to 50%. You're probably gonna, if you're really pretty good, you're probably gonna win 55-ish% of your game, 60%.
Yeah, I mean, I play. What I play is Magic the Gathering, and I play an arena, and so I can track my stuff, right? And I get a dominant deck that is just crushing, and then I'll go on just a brutal like lose 10 out of 12. I'll go down like 3 tiers in like literally an hour. But then like you can go look at the actual stats of that kind of build online. You can say, oh yeah, it wins 80% against this style of deck, 70% here, 40% here, and then 10% against this one. Then you just happen to run into that style of deck that it loses 10. It only wins 10% of the time against. I got to feel it's kind of the same way with some of these League of Legends. Like, yeah, your team build's going to be really well as long as it's not running against this particular set of team build that the other team runs.
There's definitely some of that. For the record, John, I was a Pro Tour Magic player as well, so we might have to talk some Magic at some point. But
nice.
It is very similar. Like Magic and poker and stuff are very similar in the way that variance works, and that like you say, even good matchups in Magic, all it takes is drawing one too many lands or whatever, and a good matchup turns into a bad matchup. So even if it's something, so like I say, things that are supposed to happen don't happen as often as they should. And learning to also, to Tony's point earlier, the idea that just looking at what you can do and not bothering to worry about the other stuff that you can't control is really the way that you grow in all of those games. In poker, people know that I have a background in poker. You look back at whether you played the hand well. It doesn't matter whether you won or lost. You need to decide if you played the hand well at each junction that you had a decision to make. It doesn't matter whether you ended up winning or losing.
Absolutely, and we talk about that at the fantasy site too. And Chris really kind of helped me with that in the early days of playing fantasy. And it was, if your process was right, if you made the right decision at the moment, it doesn't matter whether you won or lost, because if you continually make the smart plays, eventually it works out. And I think sometimes professional gambling kind of helps your mindset for these kind of things, because the best gamblers out there, if you take a year of their bets, the best are at like 57%.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't unlike a situation that happened the other night. There was a line was incorrect. Most totals for kill totals, you can bet an over under. They're going to be 24 to 27. The line was supposed to be 25.5. They missed. They had it at 12.5. And we hammered that. And I was like, this is going to be like a 9-2 game. It's just somehow they're going to, but if that happens, you're okay with it. You're not okay with it, but you made the right. You push all your chips into the center on that bet. So.
And so on that point, as someone who isn't super familiar with that world, in an effort to avoid results-based analysis and try to make sure that your process is correct, what do you do when you are betting on the LCS finals in a couple weeks? What do you do to make sure that no matter what the result is, you know that you made the right call?
There's a bunch of different types of things that you want to try to analyze, and you want to go back. Like one thing that we used to analyze a lot, and I analyze a lot, is which teams pick which champions a lot. There are champions just like straight up from the gambling, like there are just champions that you want to be involved with and champions you don't want to be involved with. Pro coaches like to take some champions sometimes. They aren't that good. So analyzing draft, analyzing how the matchups play out, analyzing the previous results of the two teams, and where are they likely to ban? What champions are they likely to take? Information like that. You look at it, and sometimes you'll go, okay, this team picks Jace a lot. They haven't had a lot of success with Jace. I'm gonna bet against them. And then sometimes that team just doesn't take Jace and they win. But if the information that you have available to you led you to believe they were going to, and you wanted to be on the other side of that, then you made the right decision, even if it didn't play out that way.
Well, and the other thing that you can do is, live betting. So there's betting ahead of the time, and on pro level, that's okay. But when you get into the more amateur level, I think that the draft has a larger impact than the pro level. So, there's Discords that I'm in that will watch just like the EU regionals, and we'll bet either at the end of draft, at the end of like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, wherever we can see that this distinct advantage and the line has moved in a wrong direction. To a point where like Bovada doesn't offer live betting on most of the EU regionals at this point because they were just getting killed. But there was a game that was very similar to that earlier in the year when the Enchanter top meta was something that some of the LCS teams were doing. There was a point where it was Dignitas versus, I want to say TSM, or maybe it was FlyQuest. I can't remember what it was, but by all metrics on what the lines are dictated by, Dignitas had like a kill advantage, 10K gold lead. Your normal probability in the situation that they had was this team's going to win 98% of the time. And the line reflected that. The other team was like plus 500 to win the rest of the way. But there was literally no way that Dignitas was going to kill anybody on TSM, and TSM was going to completely come back and win that game just based on the composition and just knowing that. You bet that. Now, they almost did it. They almost backdoored. They almost covered that. But they didn't, but they certainly didn't do it because they could kill anybody. So, you live with that decision if they somehow found a way to win, and the probability, you were betting a 2% probability when it was really a 98. There's still that, 1% chance that something could go wrong.
Yeah, there's, one thing that's interesting about in the gambling sphere is something that you don't see enough in the real world is that in the gambling sphere, you can come up with opinions, but you have to back them up with money. So like if you really think that like for one of the very first splits that I bet League, I did it because I was watching a lot of the LCK, and in the LCK they were picking Ezreal every game and they were just crushing. Like Ezreal was just overpowered at this point. But then when I watched the LCS, they took Ezreal every game, but they were not attacking in the mid game the way that you have to when you had an Ezreal at this point. He was a mid game spiking champion, and LCS teams were not like pressuring the mid game, and so they were losing with Ezreal all the time. So one of the first splits that I bet, I just started betting against Ezreal in North America every single time. But that's an example of how you can come up with a theory and a conviction, but you have to put your money behind it. And people in real life, they just spout opinions all the time. Like they just start talking about all kinds of strong opinions that they have, but very rarely are they willing to back it up with their hard-earned money. And so I think that's an interesting part about gambling. I almost think the world would just be a better place if you couldn't go spouting off about things unless you wanted to put a bunch of money behind it, because it really makes you think harder about these takes and opinions.
It definitely requires you to. I was just gonna say, it definitely requires you to put more thought into it. Particularly, I think in like the professional scene, it requires a lot more knowledge about the teams individually, about the players. But I think Emmerich is absolutely right. In the amateur scene, I think the reason that Champ Select in League especially is more influential is just because once you drop below that professional tier of player, the skill gap between individual players is just so huge. Like any consistency that you have for like stat tracking or champion consistency is kind of out the window, at least in my experience. Because there are some players that are just they are at a professional level, but they are just barely not good enough to make a team yet. And they will just stomp everything no matter what champ they're playing, particularly if they get a power pick. And so I think that's I don't think that's necessarily true in every region. I think EU is a lot better about that, and that in the EU Masters scene, I think North America is way behind on that. And I know Korea has a pretty extensive amateur scene as well. So I think that's a pretty good indicator of why those regions have found so much more success.
No, I'll say real quick, another game you see that a lot in is Counter-Strike. I talk about this a lot, but below the pro tier in Counter-Strike, the ability to like call and execute attacks on bomb sites is way worse. And so like below the top tier of Counter-Strike, the counter-terrorist side is basically always favored on every map because the teams are just not very good at executing. Whereas in the pro levels, it's different. They're much better at it.
Yeah, and I mean, you see it a lot too. Just in the lower levels, there are a lot of mistakes that are made, and I mean, you look at the LCS compared to the LCK, and like just the mistakes that are made throughout the game, the win conditions, teams recognizing them, playing to them, and understanding some of those things is just vastly different. And that's why live betting some of those can be a lot more profitable. But yeah, it could be just a champion. There was one game last year where the line wasn't updated. XL had called up two of the players from their amateur team to the pro team, and then the pro team was still getting this massive favorite against the other team that was super good before. And so I had everybody bet on it. We were watching it, and basically everything went bad. It went really bad from the beginning, and everybody trusted me. Everybody max bet, and I was just like, I don't know, guys. Our only hope was get Ezreal to 3 items, and somehow they flipped a Baron fight. Ezreal had the 3 items, took over, they pushed, they won. Everybody won their bets. Nobody was mad at me. It was a good couple minutes there. It was a bad 30 minutes, good couple minutes.
So, Tony, I guess we didn't actually ask you, do you know what live betting is as opposed to regular betting?
I think I have a pretty decent idea. I've dabbled in NFL betting, but
there you go.
For the sake of anyone watching, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
Once the match has already started, lines move fluidly as the game going. Sometimes you can get a good edge for it. Or you can when I only have like enough money to put like I just pick the 2 worst possible teams and make sure the worst possible teams just both of them win.
You think it's 9%, you're not going to win very often, but it's still right for you often to bet that line, even if you're only going to win 10% of the time. As long as the book is telling you you're only going to win, 5% of the time, and you're actually going to win 10% of the time.
So
right, and you get the bigger wins. I mean, when you're the favorite team, you basically are doubling your money. If you are picking the dog, you could triple, quadruple, 5x your money. So you get the dog right, it's worth a lot more.
So you're saying
you don't have to
the Lions to make the playoffs.
Well, just going off of esports, there's a guy that decided to look into the NCAA tournament last year. Found out that if you bet $100, just 1 unit size, you'd end up like 8 units if you went through the entire tournament. And he's done that this year too, and I think he's up like 20 some units. Now, the St. Peter's or whatever they're called, their run obviously helps that considerably. But you don't. I think his actual win percentage is closer to 30%, but he's still up money because of those situations.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting discrepancy from someone who, again, doesn't do a lot of gambling. It's the discrepancy between betting on professional play, where I think you can count on expectations a little more, as opposed to when you start dropping down the tiers, even in normal sports. Like if you go from the NFL to the college football level, I think in college football there's a lot more parity. You can I think there's a bigger chance of Michigan State beating an Alabama than there is of a Jacksonville Jaguars beating Buffalo Bills, right? There's just a bigger chance because the skill difference isn't as big. And I think that does translate back to esports. I think the problem is that in traditional sports, there is that super defined pipeline. I'll use football in America as an example, where you start playing flag football when you're 6 years old, and then you go into middle school football, into high school football, into college, and then each step along the way, you're learning new skills. Your understanding of the game gets more and more complex. Your ability to play as a team gets more refined. And then some of those guys who are naturally gifted, as well as having all of that experience, go into the NFL. That doesn't exist in esports, at least in North America. You like play by yourself for a lot. Maybe you have friends. Maybe you find when you're in high school like an amateur team to play on, and then maybe you're just really cracked, and then you happen to get found on a solo queue ladder, right?
We see that a lot in esports, even at the pro level, because of what you're talking about. Is that like basically there's only ways to improve mechanically available to you in most of these esports. Like you can just grind solo queue and you're going to get better and better and better at being a mid laner. But there's not really very many good tools to teach you team play, to teach you how different drafts work well together in that way. I mean, you have to know some of that for solo queue, but at the pro level, it's much more important. And we do often get players who, the first time that they come up to pro, either they don't have a very good understanding of that, or they don't understand how to be part of a team. We see a lot of, I mean, it happens in other sports too, but we see a lot of guys come up to the pro level and they have really bad attitude issues and things like that because they're not used to being in a professional environment like that. They're used to just grinding solo queue in their basement for like 16 hours a day. So that's something that as we fix the pipeline, I think we can really improve that and bring like some more professionalism and stuff to the scene as well.
And I think something I want to touch on there, and I think this will be relevant to you guys. I'm sure you're aware LCS playoffs are going to be live in person, and there's going to be a sold-out crowd that is sitting in front of them for the first time since COVID hit 2 years ago. A big talking point around the community right now, I don't know if you guys have heard, is that there are a lot of pros that have never played in front of an audience. They have no idea what it's like to be in front of this big cheering and jeering crowd. And that's going to cause stage fright. That's going to cause jitters. That's going to cause a drop in performance from a lot of these players. And what I'm curious about, and I'm probably going to pay attention, honestly, because now I'm really curious, is that going to affect betting lines? Right? Like, are lines going to take that into account? I don't know.
I don't think so. So, that was something that is famously talked about in our Discord. There are certain teams that were, the rogue teams of the last 2 years were famously very, very, very good until they got to the live stage. When they were playing on LAN, all of a sudden, maybe it was the pressure, maybe it was just playing on stage, even though there wasn't a crowd there, they just didn't look like the same team. And there were plenty of teams that were like that. Mad Lions were like that, and it was just a lot more prevalent over in EU that you saw the rise of some of these teams that played better when COVID hit and they were in their facility, they were comfortable, as opposed to going into the LEC kind of studio and playing against teams that were very seasoned, like your G2s, your Fanatics, and people that had a lot of that experience. But I do think that the rise of these situations for high schools and colleges to have esports and have these teams and have that kind of experience playing together and playing in a competitive level that's not just like you and your buddies, not like a solo queue where you're not communicating with anybody. I think that will help the development as long as it continues to grow within the scene.
And I'm selfishly going to say that I think that speaks to the benefits of a place like Blockhouse. Obviously, there are other places that aren't us that do this, but something like an organized LAN high school league, no matter what game it is, it doesn't matter. That gets you experience on a stage in front of a crowd. Granted, it's high school, so the crowd is going to be family and friends. That's true for every sport. But like that is a invaluable level of experience for someone who legitimately wants to get a college scholarship, because college scholarships for esports are huge. Like even smaller schools, I know, give up to $15,000 a year in scholarships just for playing video games, and that's only going to go up for those schools. It's already way bigger than that for bigger schools, more established esports programs. So it's going to be huge for people who are competing for a scholarship like that. It's going to be huge for people who think, I can actually go pro. I'm really good. I've been playing Fortnite for 10 years, ever since it came out. I could be really, really good. I could be professional level. And I think experience like that, once you have to start going to these LAN events and competing against these people, I think that's a huge edge that is, at least I think it's way bigger than a lot of people give it credit for.
Oh, certainly. I mean, I'll say when I played StarCraft at a pretty high level, like it was a way different playing ladder than just even playing in a competitive tournament. Like for some reason, just the stakes raised. It played different. It felt different, and the nerves were different. Now, I was still in the comfort of my own home when I was doing that. You take somebody out of that comfort zone and put them into situations that they don't have that experience, it's going to be different. Now, once they have that experience, it's easier to do that. But that's, I think, a big part of what those programs do that maybe they don't even mean to do, but they definitely do.
Yeah, I mean, like I have the same experience you do. I've played a lot of amateur league in the comfort of my own home, where there are just organized leagues everywhere in North America, where you just hop on a team into a Discord and you get assigned 4 teammates, and then you just play 8 weeks of a regular season. There's playoffs, yada yada yada. That, to someone who plays a video game where you've never played the video game competitively, I'm not even talking about the difference between a normal game and a ranked game. I'm talking like the difference between a ranked game where you're playing by yourself with a bunch of random people and a game where your team is predetermined. You play with the same people every week. You practice outside of your actual matches. You go into matches with prep, with game plans, with scouting on the other team. You have a coach. You have analysts that look over your VODs. That experience is awesome. Like, it's incredible no matter what level of involvement you have in it. Just being exposed to that, even organizing a league, and you get to see other teams compete against each other. It's something that esports or video games in general doesn't really have outside of amateur esports, right? Like a player like me who will never be professional because I suck, I get to have that experience, and that's really cool.
It's awesome. All right, man. Was there any other questions you wanted answered, Tony? Anything you guys want to bring up, guys? I think we've covered quite a bit of ground.
I think I'm okay. I've learned a lot about esports gambling already. It's looking likely I'll have to download DraftKings and see what it's all about.
Well, reach out in the email. I'll get you hooked up with these guys' Discord, and we'll take care of that. John,
well, I mean, anybody that's watching, I mean, esportsdepartment.com, just go there. You can join the Discord for free. Just understand that it's a very trolly environment. There are a lot of inside jokes, and don't take anybody seriously.
True story. John, interesting background. I hear you're getting into NFTs.
Yeah, I've been working in the NFT streets for like the last year and a half, and VQ2, the project that we're working on right now, is it's a little interesting. It's a game, so if you're a gamer type and you're interested in this kind of stuff, if you ever played something like Mafia before, this might be something that might be for you. So you can check us out at Vast Questions on Twitter if you like.
Vast Questions. I like it. All right. Well, everybody knows where to find me. I'm basically a celebrity, so we'll just call that a day. Well, I appreciate everyone. Thank you so much for coming on here and entertaining me and helping me sell some beer to Tony's bosses. Really appreciate that.
Hey,
I don't think they need any help. I think they're convinced.
Cookies guy says, sorry in advance, Tony.
Yeah, it's all right. I'll be okay, I'm sure.
Just go watch some episodes of the Shark Cove, look into the Book of Moose, and then you kind of get an idea of like what it's all about.
That's right.
Shout out to Cookies for the edit.
Yep, I will put an email together with you and Chris and let Chris give you all the links to the goods.
I can't wait.
All right.
Just search esports with Emmerich. That's where the live stream is. It's on YouTube. We're kind of in the off season, but I will have quite a bit of content for E-Masters coming up in about a week, 2 weeks here. So
absolutely. Love it, guys. We'll catch you next time. See ya.